It's good. It's your boy Fanon. Man, I'm going to wrap up this Danny Garcia and Brandon Rios weekend. Very good weekend of bouts with the ratings of the fights. I usually do that for whatever, what other fights that are coming up on major, on weekends, just to see how they were doing and kind of wrap up the conversation that I had about them, talking about the numbers, the viewership ratings. And I have up on the screen here for you the ratings for Danny Garcia and Brandon Rios. Now, according to my source, which lists the Nielsen ratings, Danny Garcia versus Brandon Rios did 516,000. I think that's an average, 516,000 viewers for their bout that took place on February 17th. And I got to tell you, man, that's kind of shabby. I didn't actually look with inside the Nielsen ratings, but this is the list of the reliable people, and all the other Nielsen ratings that have been released for this year. All those numbers are correct. As you see, one above it, January 20th, 637,000. That's what was listed. Devin Alexander, Victor Ortiz came out earlier. It was 1.06. They rounded up to 1.1. Gilberto Ramirez, 741K. Lucas Matisse Tacom, 719K. If you remember, we did videos that said, hey, is Errol Spence Jr., really a star, when he didn't do as well as Lucas Matisse at 719. And my premise in those videos were, yes, he did. He actually did better than Lucas Matisse did because of the percentage, because of the calculation that I do every time for the size of HBO versus Showtime, which in the way that I approach it is I multiply the Showtime number by 1.3 because it's 1.3 will give you that number plus 30%. That's the 0.3 and the 1.3. So if you do that for Errol Spence Jr., 63,000 is roughly 10%. Round down to 60,000. 6 times 3 is 18. So if you add 180,000 to that 613, you basically get 810,000, which is about 100,000 better than Lucas Matisse versus Kareem, excuse me. But look down here at Danny Garcia. That's 516. That also is slightly better than Lucas Matisse performance that you see at 719 because, 516, roughly 10% of that is 50,000. You multiply that by 3, that's 150,000. If you add 150,000 to 516, you get 656,000. So that's actually a little less. Yeah, that's a little less. That's 600,000 plus 666,000. So really, even when you control for Danny Garcia's numbers and the percentage viewership between Lucas Matisse and Danny Garcia, Lucas Matisse outperformed Danny Garcia versus Brandon Rios, and Errol Spence Jr. versus Lamont Peterson outperformed both Lucas Matisse and Danny Garcia. That does not bode well for somebody that's making an argument that they're the biggest star, the most recognized guy in boxing. Right? That's what Danny Garcia was saying when he talked about fighting Errol Spence and saying, hey, if Errol Spence Jr. fights Terrence Crawford, then Errol Spence and Terrence Crawford can, they can get together and fight me. But here you have numbers just on raw numbers where Errol Spence outperforms Danny Garcia by roughly 120,000 views. That's just about a 30% improvement over Danny Garcia and Brandon Rios. That being Errol Spence Jr. and Lamont Peterson. So I have to say the question should then be extended to that was asked of Errol Spence Jr. is with the numbers like 560K on Showtime for Danny Garcia, is Danny Garcia really a star? Is he really a star? That's what the questions, that's what the press that got put on Errol Spence Jr. when he showed up with 637,000 average. Now Danny Garcia and Brandon Rios do 516. So let me ask that question. Is Danny Garcia really the draw? Is Danny Garcia really more popular than Errol Spence Jr. is? Especially if you couple this with the same argument that was made about Errol Spence Jr. and saying, hey, well, if Errol Spence Jr. has only 637,000, doesn't that mean that his 5 million or whatever, it's 6 million people that watched him on NBC, wasn't that a fluke then because he was on NBC? Just kind of like a one-off. He lucked up because he was getting shown against, after, I don't know if it was the NBA, maybe it was the NBA playoffs or something like that televised after. Well, that number was also for Errol Spence Jr. on NBC was also bigger than the number that Keith Thurman and Danny Garcia did when they got 5 million or so, like something like that, 5 million odd views on, it was either NBC or CBS, but roughly the same situation. So this, to be very clear, is Errol Spence outperforming Danny Garcia twice in a row in the two largest events. Errol Spence Jr. did have I think a 239,000 viewership against Showtime on Showtime when he fought Kell Brook. But that was on Memorial Day weekend in the middle of the afternoon. So for the people that got on, because I've been waiting for this, because I was pretty sure that my calculations were about right. I'll say it again. Errol Spence Jr. showing against Lamont Peterson, the rankings I thought they were solid. January timeframe going up against a UFC event. Thought it was solid. I didn't think it was world beating. I didn't put him on the level of Canelo Alvarez or Manny Pacquiao or Floyd Mayweather Jr. because he did those numbers. But at the same time, I said that they were solid. While many people said that showed a weakness in his ability to be considered a star, right? Because of a differentiation between a superstar and just a star. Well, if these numbers are true, and every other one of these numbers listed out here are true, because you can verify every other one of these, 516K, if you got to ask that question of Errol Spence Jr., you got to ask that question of Danny Garcia. And thereafter, you're going to have to ask this question of Keith Thurman. Keith Thurman gets on a Showtime fight, and he draws 516, between 500 and 600,000 views on Showtime. And I'm predicting that's going to be the case. I do boxing videos every day, just like other channels do them every day. I pay attention to the vibe, the things being said about boxers, the word on the street, the electricity around their name. And I'm telling you that Errol Spence, the fact that you see boxers, Keith Thurman walking through a casino and he's getting sweated from one side and the other about whether or not he's going to fight Errol Spence Jr., tells you who the people are, who they want to see fight, and who they think are popular fighters. You can get that just from the groundswell and the feeling that you get from people's word of mouth. Because ultimately, man, word of mouth and videos being made, articles being around, that is a reflection of the popularity of a boxer. Danny Garcia is now I do think that there's a reason that people can throw just to be fair to Danny Garcia, because I like Danny Garcia. But to be fair for Danny Garcia was up against the Winter Olympics. Just like Devin Alexander and Victor Ortiz at the top here with their 1.1 million on Fox, right? They were up against the Winter Olympics. However, and I can't say that I have I can really do a comparison for the numbers from Fox and ESPN. I think Fox and ESPN, those are both cable networks. I mean, you need to get a cable subscription to get ESPN and Fox, but I think they're both pretty widely available. Fox Sports and ESPN. They're neither one of those are subscriber networks. So I would say that this Devin Alexander, that the numbers on top of this, the 1.1 million for Devin Alexander and Victor Ortiz, I mean, I think that that's probably a fair comparison between Gilberto Ramirez and Habib Ahmed. But that doesn't, if that's true, that doesn't bode well at all for this Ray Beltran versus Paulus Moses at 703,000. So as far as comparing ESPN to ESPN and Top Rank to the PBC and what they're doing, man, the PBC, if you look at as far as the month of February goes, or excuse me, actually the TV rankings and through the year of January, the PBC is outperforming everybody. Showtime is outperforming everybody. And this is not 1.1 million on Fox. That wasn't a scenario where you had like a Guillermo Rigondeaux versus Vasily Lomachenko matchup where you really do have two high-level fighters that should be that have a tremendous amount of respect in the boxing world, right? This is Devin Alexander and Victor Ortiz, who at one time were at that level or close to the level of those of the Guillermo Rigondeaux, Vasily Lomachenko, right? But they weren't there now. And from what I can see, Devin Alexander and Victor Ortiz, they came close. That fight came close to competing with Guillermo Rigondeaux and Vasily Lomachenko, which was at 1.7. So there's like a 600,000 viewership difference between those two fights. But like I said, Guillermo Rigondeaux and Vasily Lomachenko were two top 10 pound for pound fighters fighting on ESPN with a lot of buildup, a lot of energy behind it. And it did 1.6. And Devin Alexander versus Victor Ortiz is doing 1.1. I mean, that just tells you, man, that I'm not buying this argument. I'm not buying this argument that these guys need promoters to really get them to another level, because Ray Beltran has a promoter, right? Lucas Matisse has a promoter, and that promoter, and has Golden Boy as a promoter. And what numbers did they do? 709K. That's not terribly. I mean, it's just, I don't see where they get the bang of the buck out of that. However, I will tell you, man, that man, actually, you know what though? Yeah, I'll just tell you, man, I'm not necessarily buying the argument that you need to have a promoter. And also on this card, I forgot this Lucas Matisse Karim, they got 719. That also had Jorge Linares on the undercard. That had Jorge Linares, Golden Boy's top guy, number 2 guy, on the undercard. Lucas Matisse and Jorge Linares were on that card, and he did 719K. And according to my calculations, the way I adjust for it, Danny Garcia, Errol Spence Jr. outperformed Lucas Matisse and Jorge Linares on the same card when they were on the same card. And the numbers are just the raw numbers are less than 100,000 apart. So I'm not necessarily seeing out of these numbers why these boxers need promoters. I mean, I know that, yeah, I don't know. Well, I'll put it this way. I don't necessarily understand why, I can see why a promoter would make that argument, But where you have Errol Spence Jr., who's basically self-promoted, and Danny Garcia, who are self-promoted, and Devin Alexander and Victor Ortiz that are self-promoted at this time or working through the PBC, performing as well or close to guys with promoters, and in the case of Errol Spence Jr., outperforming Lucas Matisse and Jorge Linares. I mean, it's really not selling that story very well. From the first 2 months of 2018. But anyway, in closing up this video, I do want to address again and go back, double down on this Danny Garcia and Errol Spence Jr., Keith Thurman, and all that stuff. Errol Spence Jr. is a star in boxing because Danny Garcia is a star in boxing. Without a doubt, Danny Garcia has always been known as somebody that gets good numbers. I think he sells out the Barclays Center. I'm pretty sure that Errol Spence Jr. and Lamont Peterson came pretty close to doing that as well. I'll have to double check that. However, from what the network, Showtime's network, is looking at, I guarantee you Steven Espinoza knows these numbers. I guarantee you that Steven Espinoza knows those numbers. And that he can see that Errol Spence Jr. 1 month earlier outperformed Danny Garcia by about 30% in viewership. And Danny Garcia and Errol Spence Jr., I do believe they got paid right about the same amount of money. But these guys are going to have to fight. And I do not believe that Sean Porter is going to pull, fighting just whoever, that Sean Porter is going to pull those numbers. And I'm going to tell you, I don't know if Keith Thurman would either. So at this point, I'm wondering whether or not Errol Spence Jr. is the top welterweight. Now, I'm not going to say that he's the top draw for Showtime, though I have to tell you that these numbers, if I recall correctly, I believe these numbers that he did are also bigger than he also outperformed Adrian Bronner and Mikey Garcia. Because Adrian Bronner and Mikey Garcia, they averaged 584,000 views. And that's Mikey Garcia and Adrian Bronner. Mikey Garcia, the guy that people are talking about being a star, right? Now, Adrian Bronner and Mikey Garcia outperformed Danny Garcia and Brandon Rios, but they came in about 50,000 below Errol Spence and Lamont Peterson. So, and if you look at all the other numbers that were done on Showtime last year, you had Adonis Stevenson and Fanfare doing 318. Gary, I go to the evening ones. Andre Berto, Sean Porter, 435,000. Carl Frampton, Luis Santa Cruz, 587,000. The only one that I can see so far in the second month of February last year was Adrian Bronner versus Adrian Granados at 779,000. Now, with Adrian Bronner losing his steam, the only other guy that I can see right now that are doing better numbers than Adrian Bronner is probably Deontay Wilder, because I think Deontay Wilder did something like 800,000. So from what I can see, the top guy on Showtime right now is Deontay Wilder. And then the second guy is Errol Spence Jr. And then everybody else can talk about who is what after that. But these numbers are starting to show. You know, that saying, men lie, women lie, numbers don't lie. Well, people can play with numbers to tell lies. But these numbers tell a pretty clear story. That Errol Spence, as far as this calendar year goes, significantly outperformed Danny Garcia. Significantly. and the premier boxing champions and Showtime are outperforming HBO and ESPN. And the guys that don't have promoters are doing every bit as well as the guys that do have promoters, with the exception of the established star. I believe that's going to get blown out of the water with Canelo Alvarez. Canelo Alvarez, I do believe, breaks the curve. And I think Anthony Joshua will probably break the curve as well. Definitely for what he's doing over there in ESPN. And they had an incredible number of people with him and Klitschko. But that was Klitschko involved with like 600,000 people watched that in the middle of the afternoon, which is saying a lot about Klitschko and Anthony Joshua, or at least the curiosity around that fight. So anyway, it is what it is, and I'm out. Peace.